She told me that her husband was a wanted criminal. He didn't want to embarrass me, so he asked me to give up and marry someone else. My heart aches when I think of him. I saved money to support my son while waiting for him to get out of prison. It wasn't until my hair started to turn gray that I realized the truth. I saw him walking around the stores holding the hand of his true love. They were buying luxury goods as if they had never spent any money. Then I found out he was pretending to be a prisoner to get rid of me and my son. When I opened my eyes, I remembered the day my husband pretended to be a fugitive. I immediately called the police and gave them evidence of my husband's crimes. Does he enjoy playing the role of a fugitive? If this happens, he will be in prison for life. We sat down at the dinner table. My husband, Martin Short, looked at me sadly and said, "Louis, I'm so sorry. I've been hiding something from you since we were married, but now I can't bear the guilt any longer." I was shocked and quickly looked around and realized that I had really been reborn. It was the day Martin disguised himself as a wanted criminal. Seeing his behavior now makes me feel uncomfortable. Martin continued to cry. "I'll tell you the truth, Louis. I'm a wanted man. When I was 18, I robbed a man and he died. He had a wife and kids. If it weren't for him, they wouldn't be here. How did I get away with this? Now I feel like I'm paying the price for my actions." He held my hand and cried, then continued, "As a wife, will you support me?" At the table were also my son, Daniel Short, and my mother-in-law, Patricia Oswald, but no one seemed shocked by what was happening. To be honest, I almost laughed. It turned out that everyone knew the truth, but I was the only one who wasn't told. In my past life, to make up for what Martin had done, I would go to the house of my so-called victim every holiday season, bow my head, and apologized. He also bought gifts for his victims' families with the little money he had left after raising his own family, so I could only live on bread and water. I learned that the woman Martin asked me to redeem before he died was none other than his true love, Whitney. Louis, the widow and children left behind by the victim, were actually his children born out of wedlock with his mistress. Going through this process, I am glad that I was able to do something for Martin while he was in prison. Just thinking that they treated me like a fool, but at the same time laughed at my stupidity in my heart, made me very angry. When she returned to the table, Patricia began slapping her thighs. She was crying, "You've ruined us. What have we done? We lived with honesty and integrity. How could we have a son like you? You took a human life. Go. I'll take him to the police and make him surrender." Patricia pulled Martin out of his chair and led him to the door. Martin took my hand and looked at me with love. Then he said, "I'm sorry, Louis. From now on, you will have to take care of Danny on your own." As he turned to leave, my heart beat faster. I shouted to Patricia, looking sad. "Whatever he did, he's your son. Why don't you take him to the police? I have a friend who's a lawyer. Let's see if Martin can help us. Please." Of course it was a lie. How would I know a lawyer? I just wanted to scare them. Martin and Patricia shouted together. Patricia said shyly, "Didn't you say your back has been hurting recently? Now is not the best time to travel. I'll take Martin. Why don't you want me to go? Martin didn't commit any crimes, so you just want to trick me?" I asked, confused. Hearing this, Daniel immediately lowered his head, turned away, and said nothing more. But on the other hand, Patricia scolded me for finding an excuse to leave Martin. Martin also looked unhappy. He said, "Louis, I know it's hard raising Danny all by yourself, but why did you have to lie about something like that?" He gritted his teeth and seemed to have made an important decision. "Louis, when I go to prison, you will be able to remarry. Mom will be able to support Danai. I don't want you to carry this burden. You are still young. I am sure you will find something better. Be a man. I will throw you in prison. Divorce negotiations are still on the agenda. Dad, I don't want to leave you." At least it was Daniel's turn to go on stage. He ran up to Martin and hugged his leg. Martin stood there, looking brave. He looked like a hero of justice. If I hadn't been a victim of scam, I would have admired their acting skills. This is definitely one of the highest awards in the entertainment industry. I nodded and pulled out my phone. Then I'll call the police. They'll take Martin away so your mom doesn't have to go anywhere. Martin's face darkened when he heard this, but he still looked at Patricia and made a gesture to her. She was shocked and said quickly, "Louis is right. Look, Louis, why don't you stay here for a while? I'll go with Martin to visit the victim's family and let him talk to them. Sorry. After all, we have to help them. I was treated unfairly. It seemed like they wanted to distract me so that I wouldn't interfere with their plans." I nodded, pretending to be very worried, and headed towards the bedroom. It's not time yet. I checked my bank account and found that I still had $300,000 before the wedding. To prevent Martin from taking the money, I transferred it to another account. Then I started searching in the bedroom and found that one of my bank debit cards was missing. After Martin and I got married, we each deposited our monthly salaries into the same bank account to pay for our living expenses. Now that account card is gone, it's clear who stole it. With a heavy heart, I rummaged through my closet and found that all my jewelry, designer bags, and luxury items had been replaced with fakes. My heart was beating so fast. Martin is really a cruel man. He didn't leave me any money, but asked me to pay Whitney's expenses and provide financial support to Daniel and Patricia. At the same time, he couldn't interfere. And no problem. I immediately hired a private investigator and asked him to help me sort out something, but the shadow that remains in my heart remains. As I was about to fall asleep, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, Patricia started screaming in pain. She seemed to be on the verge of passing out. The woman handed Martin over to the authorities and refused to let him come home to see us one last time. Daniel screamed and ran out of the room, squeezing Patricia's leg tightly. Daddy. I need you. I pretended to be shocked and fell to the ground with a hopeless look on my face. How did this happen? I screamed and hugged Daniel. What am I going to do without Martin? How are we going to survive? However, that sadness was just an illusion, and deep down I felt very happy Martin really knows how to cover his tracks. He pretends to be arrested and then apologizes. That way, he won't actually be arrested by the police. Mom, I want to meet Martin, I said to Patricia. She quickly dismissed the idea, saying, the police said he is currently not allowed to see his family. She had a thoughtful look in her eyes and suggested, now that Martin has been arrested, it would be better to pay compensation to the victim's family and reduce her sentence. She wiped her tears and looked at Daniel. Daniel immediately started crying. He grabbed my hand and said, Mom, we have to help Dad. I laughed to myself. This is a really good plan. It seems like Patricia wants me to give money to Whitney and her kids. She cheated me. I nodded and said, you're right, Mom. I'll go get my debit card. When we returned to the bedroom, Patricia's eyes were sparkling with happiness. I grabbed my debit card, but after thinking for a moment, I put it down and grabbed the evidence from Martin's desk drawer. Soon we arrived at Whitney's house. She opened the door with a sad look on her face, but I still felt the same arrogance in her as I did in my previous life. She stared at us intently and asked, what are you doing here? Haven't you done enough for me and my children? She held the hand of a thin young woman. Her face was filled with sadness and despair. Anyone who did not know the truth might have thought that she was suffering after her husband died. Hearing Whitney's words, Patricia knelt down in front of her and pulled Daniel to kneel down with her. Whitney, we know it's our fault, she said, crying. We've done terrible things to you and your family. You can do whatever you want to me. You can hit me, but please forgive me, Martin. She left something behind to confirm my suspicions, but I don't believe she wants me to kneel down and apologize to Whitney. I'm just kidding. Why would I, Martin's legal wife, apologize to his mistress? I'm not stupid. I shook off Patricia's hand and she fell. Her head finally hit the floor. The pain made it hard for her to breathe. How did you know her name was Whitney? I asked in disbelief. Patricia's eyes blinked. She ignored the pain and quickly thought of a lie to make up an excuse. I didn't think so at first, but when I brought Martin in, he said he owed Whitney money and had to pay her back. Yes, your father said that before, Daniel added kindly. I looked at Daniel and felt a chill run down my body. I was forced to work for Whitney for decades, and then I was promised a new race card. He is really ungrateful. The girl was looking at us warily, so I looked closer. When I realized that she looked very similar to me, an incredible thought occurred to me. Whitney pulled her little girl out and looked at me. And she said, do you want me to forgive him? Of course. Give me $500,000. And not a cent less. Or I will never forgive you. As if to prove her status, she turned and walked back into the house, making a move to close the door. When she saw that I hadn't moved at all, Patricia immediately grabbed the door. Whitney said disdainfully without closing the door in time, please get out. I don't want to see you again. If it weren't for you, my husband wouldn't have died. Patricia knelt down and begged immediately, Louis, I beg you. Save Martin and I will serve you with all my heart. He is my only son. Please save my son. She suddenly burst into tears. Although he didn't show it on the outside, he was boiling inside. She seemed to be begging me, but in reality, she was pushing me to the limit. She was so sure that I would give up. What are you doing, Mom? Martin and I are husband and wife. Don't worry, we will find a way to help Martin. I quickly helped Patricia stand up. Patricia looked confused and Whitney had a satisfied look on her face, but that look only lasted for a moment. I showed Whitney the folder I had hidden behind my back and sighed. Your mom was right about one thing. Martin made the noble and right decision, and he shouldn't have to suffer any consequences. Hearing this is evidence of Martin's crime. I'm going to take this to the police station so they don't have to search my house. With these words, I pretended to leave. Daniel's face turned pale and he began to tremble. At that moment, Patricia immediately blocked my way. Even Whitney was starting to feel anxious. It seemed like she was facing two difficult choices. If she didn't give the money, Martin would definitely be arrested. No wonder she was panicking now. Patricia called me and walked me home, and Whitney was kind enough to let us in. Patricia asked me to go home and take care of Daniel. She said she would help me take the evidence to the police station. She said again with concern, Louis, you must be very tired after running all day. Come and drink some water. She handed me a glass of water that was on the table. As I reached out to take it, I noticed something floating in the water at the bottom of the glass. Whitney began to assert herself by saying, I don't need to provide evidence. I don't think Martin did it on purpose, ha ha ha. She actually claimed that the man who killed the victim after the robbery did it unintentionally. I was just kidding. I laughed at her inwardly, then put down my glass and said with a sense of justice, no, Whitney. I know my husband has caused you much pain and heartache. I believe if he were here now, he would agree with me. Don't worry. I will give you credit. You deserve it. I pretended to do it on purpose and called a taxi. Before leaving the house, I called the police. Hello. I would like to call the police. My name is Louise Henderson and my husband's name is Martin Short. I have evidence that he was involved in a robbery in 2003. I got into a taxi, and even though Patricia and Whitney tried to stop me, they kept knocking on the window and calling my name. I told the taxi driver to leave and drove away. Soon my phone started flooding with messages. Louis. If you dare to call the police and report Martin, I will make you pay a fine. Louis, let's talk to Martin. When we get back, we'll talk. Maybe we don't need to punish him so severely. Come back. Whitney pretends to be generous, but she doesn't seem to care much for her late husband. The important thing is